The Mandarin Saga begins with Tony Stark, a wealthy industrialist and chief executive of Stark Industries, accepting a covert Pentagon assignment to infiltrate a mysterious stronghold in Red China in order to gather intelligence on a secretive power figure known only as the Mandarin. The Mandarin, depicted as a reclusive warlord wearing 10 exotic rings each granting a unique function, rules a mountaintop fortress filled with deadly traps. After parachuting into Chinese territory beneath military escort, Tony is spotted yet assumed dead by the Mandarin's guards before climbing toward the Mandarin's castle and defeating several combatants along the way. Inside the fortress, the Mandarin uses 11 tactics. First, a high-frequency sound wave, then a paralyzing ray, followed by electrified walls, and finally hand-to-hand combat in which he breaks a steel bar with crushing force to demonstrate his strength. Tony summons his slide rule calculator broadcast system embedded in his armor to estimate the correct angle in which to allow a strike, causing the blow to injure the Mandarin instead of himself, and use that opening to flee via his rescue aircraft as the Mandarin lies stunned on the floor. Meanwhile, back at Stark Industries, Pepper Potts, identified as the personal assistant to Stark, becomes upset that Tony cancels his appearance at a dinner for company employees. She insists that Happy Hogan, a security coordinator employed by Stark Industries, take her as a date. Tony returns to New York in time for the dinner, unaware of Pepper's frustration or Happy's hopes. The siege concludes without resolution of the Mandarin's motives. He is left alive in his Chinese stronghold, planning his next move. The event establishes the Mandarin as Iron Man's arch-enemy, beginning a recurring rivalry that spans many subsequent storylines. The issue ends with no victory beyond escape. The Mandarin survives intact, and Tony leaves with intelligence but uncertainty, establishing a tone of suspense and escalation that defines their ongoing conflict. The Demon in a Bottle arc opens with Tony Stark riding a plane when a tank crashes through the fuselage. He secretly suits up in the armor stored in his briefcase, saves the passengers by ocean landing, and learns that Namor, a king defending an aging farmer on an island that Roxxon Oil Corporation secretly occupies to extract vibranium, was responsible for tossing the tank, leading to a temporary alliance and the island's destruction to erase evidence. While flying home in the suit, Tony, now facing armor malfunctions, crashes into his building. He tests his systems with no error, and later goes to Atlantic City with Bethany Cabe, a security expert and romantic interest, where Blizzard, Melter, and Whiplash stage a casino raid and hint that Hammer wants Iron Man alive. Tony, under escalating pressure, agrees to attend a United Nations ceremony as Iron Man on behalf of his company, Stark International. His armor is remotely forced to fire on and kill the Carnelian ambassador, implicating him in murder. The police allow him to surrender the suit under investigation while his drinking visibly intensifies. He meets the Avengers, who ask him to temporarily step down as chairman. Tony trains under Captain America and recruits Scott Lang to infiltrate Whiplash's cell in prison to trace the name Hammer back to its source. Tony travels with James Rhodes, a former Air Force pilot and longtime friend who flies as his personal test pilot, to Monaco after Lang's report. They are attacked, Rhodes escapes to the authorities, and Tony is captured aboard a floating villa run by Justin Hammer, a rival British industrialist who covertly armed supervillains and installed a hypersonic override in Iron Man's armor to discredit the hero and ruin Stark International. Rhodes helps the police mount a rescue as Iron Man reclaims a briefcase full of spare armor, battles and defeats Hammer's henchmen, including Blizzard, Melter, and Whiplash, causes the floating villa to capsize, forcing Hammer to flee while recovering buried parts of the island in sinking order. Tony, now addicted and disoriented, reviews photographs of his drunken behavior in news coverage. He angrily lashes out at Edwin Jarvis, a decades-long personal butler and aide employed at Stark International and Avengers Mansion, who promptly resigns. Bethany Cabe, a veteran security consultant with a tragic past involving her late husband's death by drug overdose, visits and describes her refusal to endure denial again. She urges Tony, now facing inner demons, to allow friends to help resist the bottle, and warns that isolation will kill him if unchecked. After soul-searching, Tony agrees to cease drinking, apologizes to Jarvis, who reveals he sold 2 shares in Stark International to fund a loan for his mother, and thus prevented S.H.I.E.L.D, a covert government agency seeking a controlling interest in the firm, from buying them. The arc concludes with Tony determined to reclaim the stock, retain control of his company, and maintain his identity on his own terms. In the Monger Saga, industrialist Obadiah Stane is revealed to have manipulated board votes and led a hostile takeover of Stark International, forcing Tony Stark into bankruptcy as a result of a relapse into alcohol and self-doubt. Stark relinquishes both his company and the Iron Man identity to his ally James Rhodes and disappears from public view. Simultaneously, the West Coast Avengers, a staffed hero team, learn Tony's true identity and begin an investigation. Rhodes continues to wear the armor, but experiences debilitating headaches and consults with Henry Pym, a biophysicist physicist who becomes trapped with Rhodes in an alternate dimension known as Otherwhere. Meanwhile, Stark, lost at sea after abandoning the armor, evades death and washes ashore later in the arc. A masked vigilante calling himself the Scourge of the Underworld, an avenging figure targeting minor villains, makes a sudden appearance and assassinates a recurring criminal known as the Enforcer. The rookie Iron Man realization that Rhodes's version of the armor was poorly calibrated causes Rhodes to spiral toward violence. Stark clandestinely constructs a simple gray prototype of his original armor to physically restrain Rhodes mid-battle. After that conflict, Stark, having regained sobriety, moves to Los Angeles and launches a new firm called Circuits Maximus, dedicated to user-friendly consumer electronics and clean energy repulsor research. While Rhodes avoids prosecution, Stark leaves the Iron Man identity in abeyance as he focuses on technological redesign. His old allies, Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan, withdraw from his life to safeguard themselves from S.H.I.E.L.D. International's influence. S.H.I.E.L.D. finalizes the assembly of a remote-controlled drone weapon called the Circuits Breaker under his company S.H.I.E.L.D. International, then commissions criminal strategist Madame Mask, a disfigured and masked femme fatale who leads the criminal organization Magia, to infiltrate Circuits Maximus. S.H.I.E.L.D. kidnaps Stark's confidants Bethany Cabe and suddenly makes overt threats against Tony, believing Rhodes to be the current Iron Man. It is revealed that S.H.I.E.L.D. performed clandestine research into Stark's archived armor schematics and enlisted engineers to build a massive suit of enhanced power armor called the Iron Monger, leveraging an external computer system because he lacked symbiosis with the armor. He also engineers a mind switch device that temporarily swaps Bethany's mind with masks to distract Stark. Further, S.H.I.E.L.D. plans to use Bethany's unborn child as leverage to bait Iron Man into opening his helmet during a final confrontation. Stark unveils his new Silver Centurion armor, a streamlined red and silver battlesuit with refined targeting and increased flight speed, and flies to East Long Island for a one-on-one duel with Iron Monger. Learning that Monger's suit is controlled externally, Stark programs Centurion's pulse bolts to sever the uplink to S.H.I.E.L.D. International's command computer, causing Monger to seize. With no backup control interface, S.H.I.E.L.D. refuses arrest, removes his helmet, and directs the armor's repulsor ray into his own skull in a final act of defeat. As authorities rush in, Stark decides not to reclaim S.H.I.E.L.D. International's assets. Instead, he rebrands his Los Angeles venture as Stark Enterprises, deliberately distancing himself from his former empire. S.H.I.E.L.D. International continues operating under new ownership until Stark later repurchases it as part of his expanded corporation. In the Armor Wars arc, Tony Stark discovers that a former mercenary named Force is using a suit derived from Stark's own stolen blueprint designs. After analyzing Force's suit, he confirms that the data was lifted by Spymaster, a covert saboteur-for-hire identity using espionage costumes, who then sold those secrets to Hammer, a rival arms industrialist, who in turn distributed Iron Man-based gear to paid users across different nations and criminal circles. Stark designs and tests portable negator packs that destroy circuitry, traced back to his design when attached to a target suit. Wearing Iron Man armor, he assembles a list of known users. He disables each until they can no longer operate their suits. He then tracks Stingray, a sea-born government armored agent based at Hydro Base off the New York coast, incapacitates him with electrical discharge, and attempts to negate the armor, but finds it self-designed, leading to a US government order that Iron Man's contract is terminated. Despite intervention from the West Coast Avengers, Stark responds that his problem is personal and proceeds to New York City to disable 5 Mandroid suits, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s armored command units, fabricating a false identity for Iron Man, and a false infestation base to justify his actions. He next deploys a stealth-modified armor to fly into Soviet airspace where he confronts Crimson Dynamo, an armored Russian operative using repulsor and flight gear, negates that suit, and engages Titanium Man, a Soviet heavyweight flight armor pilot, whose overheated frame explodes and kills the pilot. Firepower, a US government test pilot wearing an externally controlled battle armor developed from stolen Iron Man circuitry and backed by cord-run conglomerate allied with Hammer, lures Iron Man into a desert trap and apparently destroys the armor in a crash that convinces the world that Iron Man is dead. Stark reemerges wearing a rebuilt Iron Man armor that blocks external design interference, intercepts Firepower's nuclear missile, deactivates it, and ensures Firepower is captured before deciding that he must continue as Iron Man to prevent further misuse of his innovations. In an epilogue, Stark walks through haunting visions of destroyed armor and past battles, the technology crisis resolved, but his personal guilt lingering. In the Extremis storyline, 3 men enter the coal slaughterhouse in Bastrop, Texas. 2 forcibly administer the experimental Extremis serum to their partner. That subject writhes violently and is locked inside the room. Several days later, at the Future Farm complex in Austin, Texas, the chief scientist Aldrich Killian is discovered dead next to a printed confession stating that he released Extremis to unknown third parties. Maya Hansen, a co-developer of the formula, contacts Tony Stark requesting urgent aid. Stark, troubled by regret over past weapon sales and lingering shrapnel in his chest, abandons a corporate interview to don his armor and fly to her compound. Tony tracks the van of the Extremis user as he approaches the FBI field office. That user, known as Malin, bursts into the building and begins a massacre impervious to gunfire. Meanwhile, Stark's armor proves too slow and brittle to halt him immediately. Civilians and law enforcement suffer casualties before Tony manages to trap Malin beneath a burning car. Thermal exposure forces the suit to line feed at 1% power, which allows escape but leaves Iron Man critically stranded. Stark arrives at Future Farm and reveals his identity to Hansen. He concludes the only means to survive his injuries and outpace Malin is to inject himself with a modified dose of Extremis. Hansen complies under Stark's directed consent. Within the compound's medical bay, Stark's body encases in a scabbed cocoon for several days. When the transformation ends, he wakes regenerated with new organs and no shrapnel. His bones now house a compressed suit that expands around him with neural command. Stark accesses a satellite cluster from a secret lab on long-term Iron Reef Island. Using bioelectric repulsors and neural control, he traces Malin to Washington, D.C. The transformed Stark intercepts Malin while the city is evacuated. Their aerial confrontation ends when Stark locks Malin's head between his hands and blasts it apart with twin pulses. Civilian risk is minimized as the villain falls motionless on a construction site. Stark returns to Austin with law enforcement. Hansen consents to arrest after admitting she allowed Extremis to go live as proof of concept for Future Farm funding. She compares Extremis to an atomic bomb tripwire, and Stark replies that at least he tries to be better than she is, adding that he will be able to look at himself in a mirror again. Extremis concludes with Tony declaring his commitment to use technology for progress rather than destruction. The final issue functions as a coda, featuring flashbacks to Stark's origin in Afghanistan, explanations of the Extremis serum's mechanism, and philosophical reflections on the cost of wielding this new power while preserving moral agency. In the Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. storyline, Tony Stark formally assumes command of S.H.I.E.L.D. after the absence of Nick Fury. Maria Hill, a hard-edged agent who becomes the deputy director, tries to help him adjust. Dum Dum Dugan, a loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agent known for decades of service, submits his resignation in protest at Stark's active leadership style, but is persuaded to stay and act as an insider. Sal Kennedy, a career S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who dislikes Stark's changes, helps staff the newly formed S.H.I.E.L.D. Alpha Team, a special operations cell wearing Alpha Team armor. Maya Hansen, a scientist who helped develop Extremis, joins S.H.I.E.L.D. operations as a technical advisor. A Jemaah Islamiyah terrorist cell surfaces at the Sydney Opera House with Vinox nerve agent bombs. Stark, wearing Extremis armor, leads the Alpha Team in securing the nerve agent and relocating it to a remote sea platform. During this mission, he unveils a new weapon system called STAR, Stark Tactical Assault Repulsors. The S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier's daycare facility and its new airborne stealth carrier also debut in service. Meanwhile, in northeastern China, Dr. Chen introduces Karim Mahwash Najib, a former government terrorist, to a mysterious immobilized figure in the Hupo Psychiatric Institute, who is later revealed to be the Mandarin, now aged but alive, due to an ancient regenerative affliction. Stark organizes global S.H.I.E.L.D. support for post-Civil War super team training. Meanwhile, Darius Faraz, a former intelligence expert and extremist activist turned experimental ringwielder, launches attacks from a hidden base in Barbados. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Alpha Team, still under Stark and Hill's direction, investigates the source of Faraz's rings and their connection to the Mandarin. Dr. Chen plans to study the Mandarin's ageless state, causing concern. Extremis armor and Alpha Team armor are tested in these encounters. Hoffman's suppression fields deployed by S.H.I.E.L.D. help contain extreme violence. The Mandarin's influence moves beyond myth, as cryptic news reports show escalations in global terrorism, all pointing back to his long-hidden presence. The Mandarin's illness, a strange regenerative tumor, is discovered to have spread to the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier systems via infected Extremis tech circulating through Stark systems. Maria Hill orders a full evacuation after believing the tumor infection to be an act of war launched by rogue Extremis cells. Stark conducts diagnostic scans to isolate the tumor and counteract it using his proprietary nanotech. Meanwhile, a hidden mole inside S.H.I.E.L.D. leaks false intelligence about Hydra involvement to misdirect public perception. The Alpha Team armor and new stealth carrier are deployed to track down where the remodeling originates. At the United Nations, the global leadership begins to question the viability of Stark's command and rot behind his new protocols. Dugan quietly assures Stark of continued loyalty and warns of possible sabotage from within. As the arc concludes, Maria Hill Hill, still serving as deputy director, decides to lock down the S.H.I.E.L.D. armory, martial law the United Nations campus, and leak documents to allow Stark to escape a Commission on Superhuman Activities tribunal. Hill resigns from her deputy role afterwards. Stark confronts the Mandarin in the remote laboratory of the Hupo Psychiatric Institute and, during the battle, severs the energy source of the Mandarin's tumor, causing it to regress and exposing the Mandarin's agility and mastery of the Ten Rings. Stark then overrides the energy protocols of the star system and triggers an EMP blast to disable the Mandarin's Extremis enhancements while ordering S.H.I.E.L.D. forces to detain the Mandarin. The Commission subsequently exonerates Stark and formally disbands S.H.I.E.L.D. shortly afterward, citing breach of trust. The Five Nightmares storyline sees Tony Stark facing S.H.I.E.L.D, son of Obadiah S.H.I.E.L.D, who is set on global vengeance using stolen Stark armor and damaging advancements in weaponized augmentation. The opening sequence enumerates 5 worst-case fears Stark imagines: relapse into alcohol dependence, indefinite replicability of his armor design, unauthorized operators utilizing his suits, loss of uniqueness through obsolescence, and a low-cost, easily produced armored network, establishing psychological stakes before global events unfold. Ezekiel engineers a suicide bomber assault at Plaza de Roma in Manila, killing every member of the Triumph Division, a Filipino superhero team whose successive generations protected Southeast Asia. The massacre forces Stark to officiate at funerals attended by Maria Hill. Later, secret operations are tracked as Stark activates the armor map system, identifies black market users of Stark suit fragments in New York City and Boston, breaches a hidden AIM facility in China, and confronts MODOK, an android war machine repurposed with stolen technology, which he disables before realizing a larger mastermind is orchestrating events. Simultaneously, Pepper Potts endures emergency surgery after she is wounded in the Taipei bombing. Stark cooperates with medical staff to implant a magnetic stabilizer to save her life. Ezekiel emerges severely scarred but bioengineered, so that thermal damage no longer debilitates him. He retreats with his assistant Sasha Hammer. The final issue culminates in a showdown over international waters, as Iron Man corners Ezekiel in a decaying plant. After disabling Stane's energy-harnessing augmentations, Stark restores armor map control and forces surrender. The epilogue shows Spider-Man tracking black market Stark tech dealers. Stark cites the Superhuman Registration Act to warn him off, but Spidey vows to keep showing up. The arc concludes with Stark reclaiming complete control of his armor, reaffirming Stark Industries' dominance in global tech security, and foreshadowing alliances and conflicts that emerge later in the Invincible Iron Man run. The World's Most Wanted story follows Iron Man in a global fugitive narrative built around a collapsing Extremis enhancement and a hidden database. Post-Secret Invasion sets the scene. A virus unleashed by the Skrulls disabled Tony Stark's Extremis-mediated technology and discredited Stark globally. American authorities replace S.H.I.E.L.D. with Hammer, now led by Norman Osborn. Osborn seizes registration files and lays a global manhunt for Stark, whom he blames for Earth's Skrull infiltration. Tony Stark discovers foreign workers eject him from a Chelsea Piers demolition site after he drops debris from malfunctioning Extremis-controlled armor. Realizing Osborn can breach his Superhero Registration Act files, Stark uploads a virus that corrupts every copy except the one encoded in his own brain. He resolves to delete that version personally while on the run. Stark hops between hidden armories and activates repair station terminals to remove neural segments. Each deletion erodes memory and motor control. Stark convinces Maria Hill, formerly second-in-command at S.H.I.E.L.D., now stripped of rank, to participate in the deletion sequence, which also involves Pepper Potts. Osborn announces a warrant for treason and orders Hammer forces to seize Stark Industries offices across multiple cities. Stark detonates explosives in his stored armors at Funtime Inc. rack to deny Osborn advance access. Pepper discovers a hidden female design armor in Long Island and later dons the invulnerable rescue armor powered by a repulsor chest plate. Hammer agents are shown opening fire in Russia and appointing Dmitry Bukharin, the Crimson Dynamo, as regional operative. Stark is shot down before encountering Bukharin. Pepper in rescue prevents a grain silo collapse. Osborn tries to bribe Dmitry for overflight rights but fails. Stark and James Rhodes engage in a staged aerial duel in Los Angeles so that Rhodes appears uninvolved in the pursuit. Stark escapes to offshore armory while Osborn assigns Namor to kill him in the Red Sea. Osborn also hires Madame Mask. Osborn then places a multi-billion-pound bounty on Stark's head. Stark is seen in refrigeration in Russia, where Mask tortures Pepper via remote repulsor shock to coerce Stark. Stark, exhausted, pleads with Mask. Pepper seizes Rescue's power remotely and incapacitates Mask. Stark flees. Hammer extracts a repulsor signature and sends Osborn in Iron Patriot armor into pursuit. The final confrontation in Dubai occurs as Osborn in Iron Patriot catches up to Stark. Stark's cognition has nearly ceased. Pepper appears in rescue and activates a global broadcast, revealing Osborn's violent actions to international media. Under scrutiny, Osborn bows out mid-fight, and Stark whispers, "I win," before collapsing into a vegetative state. Osborn orders a doctor aboard the helicarrier to pull the plug, but is legally barred as Stark had granted Donald Blake, the mortal identity of Thor, power of attorney. Blake begins a holographic reboot protocol that will restore Stark's damaged brain.